everyone. Welcome back to the Israel Connection. My name is Esti Zenati, and my guest today is author Liz Hirsh Naftali. She is the great aunt of Abigail Mor Idan, a then 3-year-old who was kidnapped by Hamas terrorists on October 7, 2023 from Kfar Aza, after her parents were both murdered in front of her and her 2 siblings by Hamas terrorists. Abigail was held in Gaza for 51 days. This devastating family tragedy transformed Liz into a tireless global advocate for all remaining hostages. She travels the world sharing her personal story and her book, Saving Abigail, to deliver a powerful message of truth, hope, and humanity to leaders and communities alike. Liz, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
So Liz, for those who don't know about your family, what can you tell us about you and your family prior to the October 7 attack? How was life in Israel for you guys?
So for my family in Israel, and I lived in Israel for many years and going back and forth, but for our family that lived in Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which is a neighborhood along the border with Gaza in the southern part of the country, they lived a really special, beautiful life. The community that they lived in, my family moved there over 60 years ago, raised kids, they're raising grandkids, and it was just a place where when I lived in Israel with my little kids, we would go there. And the one thing I knew is that my kids could run around and just play and have fun, and they were safe. And so when you went there, you'd see kids playing and dogs running around and families. And that's how my family lived. And the kids would go to nursery school or their schools nearby and walk back and forth. And literally, after a kid is 2 or 3 years old, they can almost do the walk themselves.
Yeah.
Because everybody's looking out for everyone. It's a beautiful family of people. And on this kibbutz, Kfar Aza, there are about 750 people. And for the most part, every day for them was wonderful. My personal family, I had 2 nieces living there with husbands and raising kids, and my sister-in-law and her husband living there. And, you know, amidst this beautiful community, they also had each other. So these cousins were growing up together, all different ages, and my sister-in-law could be there with them so often. So even though they were living in this kibbutz neighborhood, this family got to stay very close, and they did many things together. So that's what life was like for them before October 7th.
Yeah, a lot of the people from those kibbutzim, they said that prior to October 7th, it was 95% heaven, 5% hell. That's how they described, you know, the life in that area.
Yeah, listen, they knew who their neighbors were.
Yeah.
And from my family, they respected that those were neighbors that they were living next to, and they lived next to them for, you know, many, many years. My sister-in-law had been there almost 60 years.
Wow.
And so for them, it was just part of that's who our neighbors are. There wasn't any hostility. They knew that there would be could be some danger, but for the most part, and really truly for the most part of those years, they were living peacefully next to each other.
Yeah. So you were in Israel during the attack.
Yes.
Can you walk us through the moment you realized that your great niece Abigail was missing, and how quickly did you realize you had to transform from a family member to a public international advocate?
So I'm gonna leave a little bit to people should read the book Saving Abigail, and because I think, and I have it here, and it's the reason I show this is because I'm going to tell you a little bit. But this is a book that tells people, Jewish, not Jewish, young, old, people what happened on October 7th to our family and to so many families that day.
Yeah.
And so this book, Saving Abigail, is really a way for me to get people to help share Abigail's story, because Abigail's story is one of 35 children that day who were kidnapped. It's a story of my niece and nephew who were killed that day. And they were 2 of over 1,200 people. My niece was an American. She was one of 47 Americans murdered that day. And so I tell you this because as I'm about to tell you the story, I want people to understand this is a story that I will be telling for the rest of my life. But I want people to help share this so that we can get the truth. You talked about what I talk about, and really I just want the truth to be told about October 7th. So that morning I was in Israel and I was at a hotel, and the sirens went off. And as you and I'm sure many people listening know, in Israel, when sirens go off, everyone runs to a bomb shelter or to a safe room. And in our family's case, that was, in their kibbutz. I was in Tel Aviv. And so I was running to the stairwell. And after you do this, you start life again. That's how it's supposed to be, even how horrible it is that you're going to a bomb shelter. So on this morning, the missiles kept coming. We kept running back, the loudspeakers, the sirens, sending us back to the stairwell. And, really about an hour later, we started learning that this started at 6:30 in the morning. And by 8 o'clock, we heard something was happening along the border. So I called to my family on the kibbutz, but no one answered. And then I called my sister-in-law in Tel Aviv area and I asked her what was going on. And the first thing she said was that my niece and her husband and Abigail, their 3-year-old child, little girl, had been murdered by terrorists that morning at their home in the kibbutz. And how did they know? Because the 6 and 9-year-old, my niece Madar and her husband Roe, had 3 children, Abigail 3, Amalia 6, and Michael 9. And the 6 and the 9-year-old were in a closet in the dark with a cell phone. And they were telling people what happened. And they were describing that morning when the sirens went off, their father, who was a photojournalist, he had gone outside to take photos, which he had done many times to tell the rest of the country what was coming.
Yeah.
And while he was out, the terrorists broke through the fence, which was right next to their home. And they were one of the first homes that they went in. And they just murdered her in front of these 3 children. And he was running back because he realized it was a terror attack. He was actually taking photos of not just missiles, but of terrorists with grenades and missiles paragliding into their community. He ran back. The kids were running outside. He picked up the 3-year-old Abigail, and they all started to run. And then he was murdered, cold blood murdered. And he fell onto Abigail, and little Michael and Amalia ran home in terror, and they locked themselves in a closet for 14 hours. Nobody came to rescue them. The army was not there. Nobody could come from any other home in the kibbutz because everyone was locked in their safe rooms. So that's how I learned. That was how I spent October 7th in the hotel, not being able to do anything, but to start to tell the story. And people were all confused. They didn't really know what was going on. And so that beginning of that day, I was talking to my family and talking to my friends in Israel, but throughout the day, sharing the story with people in America, where I came from New York, throughout the United States, but internationally, because as you know, people started finding out who was there and hearing things.
Yeah.
And so that's how my day went. But the day for Michael and Amalia was 14 hours before they were rescued. And they believed that Abigail had been killed. And my niece and her husband, Liron and Zoli, lived on the other side of the kibbutz with their 3 children. They were only rescued after 28 hours.
Wow.
And my sister-in-law happened to have been in Bulgaria with a group. It was Simchat Torah, so she was on a tour for the holiday. And she found out her daughter had been murdered because she called her kids, the 6 and 9-year-old, and she said, "Why is it dark?" And they told her what happened. And she couldn't believe that her daughter had been murdered. And she said to them, "You show me." And the kids opened a closet to show her mother, their grandmother. And so for me, like, wherever anybody is in this moment, this is exactly how our day was. And it was so overridden by terrorists. There's about 700 people in this community. There were over 300 terrorists. So it took a few days because the terrorists and the people were fighting, and then some reservists showed up and they were fighting. And by the time they could clear this kibbutz a few days later, Abigail was nowhere to be found. Her body was not there. And so then we put the pieces together because there were WhatsApp groups and people were going crazy and people didn't know what to do. But by the time a few days came, we learned that Abigail had actually survived and climbed out from under her father's body and found someplace safe to go. And then that place was no longer safe because then she was taken as a hostage.
Yeah, she went to the neighbor's house and was kidnapped with the entire family. So, I mean, I remember seeing Loi's video. That was, I think, the first video that everybody saw of the paragliders coming down.
Yeah.
And ever since then, that was their family was all over the news. And I know Zoli spoke a lot because then they ended up, adopting the children and, the Leon and Zoli. So that was incredible of them. But So your book, Saving Abigail, it recounts the 51 days of uncertainty. Guys didn't know what was going on with Abigail. How did you and the family manage the intense emotional roller coaster and of hope and fear, and while simultaneously working on high stakes advocacy efforts and speaking around the world?
Look, I went back to America and I started telling people the story.
Mhm.
And when we realized that this was not going to be like they're going to release these children and grandparents and hostages, these people they stole from their beds, literally
Yeah.
that morning, after murdering others in their family and ransacking their homes, we understood that Abigail was a hostage. Our hope was that she was alive and she was a hostage. Keep in mind, once they went into Gaza, we didn't know.
Yes, right.
So our family had to bury Rowie and Smadar. And my family had to take care of everything here I'm in Israel as I'm speaking to you tonight. And they took care of everything. And I couldn't come back. But what I did was I'm going to fight for Abigail. And when I realized that she was a hostage, I said, please send me a picture. And they did send me this picture of Abigail.
Oh,
And
wow.
this picture became
Mhm.
so well known, and Abigail
Yes.
became such a well-known child. There are lots of beautiful children,
Mhm.
unfortunately kidnapped. But what I did was I took this photo right in the beginning and I went to Washington, D.C. and I just knocked on every door and I had people helping me. I did not do this alone, but I literally knocked on every door. I spoke to leaders on the Democratic side, on the Republican side, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, big city, small city, House, Senate, anywhere, telling Abigail's story. And I was the first person to get there because I was American and I was there. And so I literally spent about 45 days once we realized that Abigail was a hostage in Washington, D.C., almost the full week when the senators and the Congress folks were there, and just did meeting after meeting. And then families started to come from Israel because obviously they weren't getting anything from their government, and they knew that the US government was going to be the government to help them. So they were coming, excuse me, and meeting with the senators and the Congress folks. And I was joining those meetings and helping them and being sort of a quiet leader because I understood a little bit more how America worked. And I also was a native English speaker, and I wasn't a mixed, I'm not Israeli.
Yeah.
And so I think that it just was this moment of, I just went into you go fight or flight, and I just went to fight. And I was going to do everything I could. And I took that picture of Abigail and I gave it to so many people. And I write about it in the book, like people that you and I may think aren't like on our team, like people were on our team. But what I understood was in the press and in the Capitol and everybody. I mean, I didn't just give that picture to like the leader. I gave it to everyone in their staff. I gave it to the security guards everywhere. And that picture got in the hands of some very powerful senators, and then it got in the hands of Joe Biden, the president. And so I think that what I learned from this was like, in this moment, I just said, I'm not going to let anyone stop me. I'm going to be respectful, but I'm just going to go and fight for this child. But I also took the picture of all the other hostages.
Mhm.
When we had that picture with the mosaic of all those 250
Yes.
people who were stolen. So I would hand them Abigail's picture. I would hand out the mosaic. There was no forum in Israel that was doing anything yet. There was nobody. And so it was just me kind of figuring it out early on. And then others, thankfully, were able to help join in this passionate work. And that is why we are now sitting here with, as we speak, 2 hostages that need to be coming back. But it's been relentless. And people have just, the families and so many people in the Israeli society and throughout the world, and where you are, have not let this become something that has been forgotten or a story that has been pushed aside for other narratives. So I
Right.
think that what I've learned, and this is the one thing I talk about now whenever I talk, is like the resilience. And we need to keep being resilient. We have so many other obstacles. But for the hostages and for myself, this was just a mission of, I'm going to do everything I can to bring this little child home. And my sister-in-law would call me and say, is Abigail going to come home? She just lost her daughter. And I said, yes, I'm going to help bring her home. And that was like my thing. I looked at the picture of Abigail, this beautiful child, and I said to a photo, I'm going to bring you home. No idea how, in other than just going to fight like crazy. And that's what brought Abigail home. and all these people, myself, but so many people fighting for her and for all the hostages. And, here I am now, thankfully, where she's, just celebrated her 6th birthday, and her 4th birthday was in
Oh, yeah.
Gaza. So, we look at this and we think, with all of the loss, at least this child's been able to start to heal and move forward, and her family. And like you said, the 3 children have been adopted by their aunt and uncle. And so they live now 6 beautiful children, a loud house, lots of energy,
Yeah.
but lots of love. And that love is what is going to keep them going and keep them with a track towards being able to have a life that is healthy.
Yeah, and I've seen some interviews with Leon and Zoli, especially Zoli, who spoke a lot, and you can tell how much they love those kids, and they really wanted to make sure that they were okay.
Yes,
Um,
they're beautiful, and
Yeah.
that's what they are dedicated to doing, which is to
Yeah.
making sure these 6 children will be okay and will thrive. But I will tell you, and I'm a mom, I'm almost a grandma, but I'm a mom, and I know how hard it is to raise 5 children under normal circumstances. Raising 6 children under these circumstances is just very, very challenging, and they do it beautifully.
Yeah. So how are the kids doing now with, I mean, how have they been doing since Abigail came back, with dealing with everything that happened, with seeing their parents murdered, because all 3 of them saw their parents being murdered. And I mean, I get, for an adult, it's extremely painful and tough to deal with, but for a child, that's something no child should ever witness. How are
No,
they doing now? How have they been dealing with this throughout this past couple of years?
look, they're in a community that loves them. They have grandparents, and they have aunts and uncles, and they have Zoli and Larone, and they are all loved, and they are all embraced, and they go to school. They all have therapists. All
Mhm.
the people in Israel who were affected by October 7th have had therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists. It is everybody. So all the children in my family and all the children that are directly affected are in therapy, and that's good. But they also go to schools that understand, but they're also they're children. And
Yeah.
so when you're a child and you're playing on a sports team, or you're taking a karate class, or you're dancing with your friends, like, life can be kind of seem like it's normal, and you want their lives to be normal. But there are moments where that they will say something about their life before, or their parent. And most of the time you wait for them to speak about it because they're children.
Yeah.
But what I do know is that they saw things that are unimaginable. They experienced unimaginable horror, and yet they are children, and there is a resilience. Think about Abigail. She crawled out from under her father's body, covered in his blood. There's terrorists everywhere. This little teeny petite 3-year-old child is running to a house. No one's there because they're all hiding in a safe room. She runs to another house, and just by a miracle, the father was going out to protect the kibbutz, a man named Avichai Brodich. He just happened to be opening the door. But when I think about her resilience, she didn't stop. She kept trying to find somebody, and there's a war going on around her. A war. Hamas terrorist organization has landed in her neighborhood, and she does not know what to do. She's just going to go find somebody to help her. So that strength is what she has and her siblings have. And I look at it and I say, we're going to be there to keep supporting them through their lives.
Yeah. Does she speak about what happened? Does she remember the details? Because she was so young. Normally, a 3-year-old, after a few years, you don't remember most of
Yeah.
the things.
She knows. Look, she remembers and she knows, but it's not part of her conversation. Her daily conversation is what she did at school today. And that's what it should be.
Yes.
But she knows, and they all know. And they are thoughtful, and they can bring it up when they feel comfortable. But for the most part, and they should do it, which is what children need to do, which is to live their lives in that moment.
So in your book title, Saving Abigail, was the saving merely the physical return, or does the book explore a deeper form of saving, like preserving her spirit and family's hope?
It's a really good question, because when I wrote it, I wanted people to understand that, like, I literally stopped and just said, I'm going to fight and I'm going to save Abigail. And when Abigail came back, there were still 105 women and children came back at the end of November 2023. there were still over 140 people, 150 people. And so I kept working with these families, kept doing a lot of advocacy work in DC and traveling. And what I understood was like, we're in this together. So while the book is called Saving Abigail, it was kind of like, I talk about it, it's like, it really is saving Abigail, saving us. Like, how do we save ourselves? How do we work together? And that's sort of where I'm at in these moments. But when I wrote Saving Abigail, it was also saving Abigail for her mother and father, because her parents were murdered and she needed to be able to come home and she needed to be able to come to her family. And there was just something in me that was like, I'm going to do this in their honor. And when I would meet with leaders, I'd say, her parents are no longer here. Please be her auntie and her uncles. Because what I understood was if you personalize it, then you get our leaders, Democrats, Republicans, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle, but you get their heart and you see their humanity. And we had that, and we've had that for the hostages. But going back to the title, Saving Abigail is really like the essence of, yes, I helped to save her life, but I also helped to save her world. And it just felt to me like kind of, I don't know how to say this, but like, what is it that you would have done? What is it that we would have all done, which is we would go out and save a child's life.
Yes.
And so I wanted people to understand that that's what I did. And so many other people joined. But for me, it was a very personal thing. It was literally all I did, didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't drink. And all I did was just keep focused on Abigail and all the hostages, but using Abigail as that beacon. And so when she came back, and now that she is a little girl that is growing up and having, you know, play dates and going to school and dancing and singing, like, we understand that we're all still helping to save Abigail because we're trying to make this world better for her and for the kids.
Yeah, so it's saving all the children, basically. It's
yeah.
We need
and
to
I talk about that. Look, I talk about the world she lives in. We have to do this for all the kids. It could be the kids living in Gaza. It could be the kids living in Egypt. It could be the kids living in Maryland. It could be the kids living in Los Angeles, New York, Tel Aviv. This is like the work that I feel this moment has brought us to, which is how are we going to work together across hard lines, hard conversations, and many disagreements to figure out how we're going to save all of us, but all the children.
Yeah. So you've been everywhere, basically talking to political figures all over the world. Was there anybody that was a surprise to you, that like their allyship was a surprise, that you did not expect them to be supportive of the cause?
There's so many people that I did not expect. And then there's people I expected who didn't show up. And that was a hard piece. But look, I early on met with Ambassador Al-Thani, the Qatari ambassador in Washington, D.C. Abigail was a hostage. And when I went to this man, I did not know, I wasn't like afraid, but I just didn't know who he was. And I sat with him one-on-one and talked to him about Abigail. And look, he's a father of children. He heard the story and he was committed even at that moment to helping do what he could. He had met with a couple of other hostage families. He'd met with Avichai Brodich, whose wife and 3 kids had been taken with Abigail. And so he met with Avichai a week before I got there. And you saw that there was heart and humanity. And what I learned and what I keep talking about is we have to work with people that have heart and humanity and that are trying to work with us. And from then, I after even Abigail came back, I went to Qatar with a group in January. It was nobody knew we were going until like somebody figured that we were out there and it started to be in the press. But it was really a handful of families. And we went there to talk with the Prime Minister, His Excellency Al-Thani. And when everybody said their piece, and then I talked a little bit about what Abigail had gone through and where she was, and that her parents were gone and her home was destroyed. I saw tears in this man's eyes. Again, he's a father, but he's the Prime Minister. But when you see those moments, or being in a room with like President Biden and Jake Sullivan and seeing these men just devastated by hostages and what that meant and the work they were doing. So when you ask like, where's surprised? I don't know that I was so surprised, but I was so reminded that beyond the titles and people's, positions. There's real human beings.
Mhm.
I mean, we were in a meeting with Lloyd Austin, okay? And I remember Aviva Siegel was talking and telling her story. She had been released and she was fighting for, obviously, Keith and all the others. And she was telling her story and she was very emotional. And then I started talking and they said that when Abigail came out, Aviva was holding her in one of those vans when they were being brought out.
Yes, right.
And I talked about Abigail and her struggle and what happened to her. And like the fact that it's a miracle she survived, but what she went through. And here's this big, tough army guy, a general, Secretary of Defense, and he's crying. So those are those moments. I'm not trying to like say everybody was crying and that made me realize it, but it just showed that no matter how hard they are all working, and I've seen it, I've sat with Steve Witkoff and heard him talk early on, right after the inauguration, right after he started to do his work in a public way, talk about he was going to fight for everyone and how emotional it was. And so when you ask that question, I just mentioned a bunch of men. There's a lot of women also, but Republican and Democrat.
Yeah. We're all humans at the end of the day, we
But we
might
have
not
to remind
agree.
ourselves. We have
Yes.
to remind ourselves because people listening to this like, of course, Republican, Democrat, but like at the end, and this is why I'm just going to segue for a second. I have this podcast, which I started before October 7th, where I talk with Democrats and Republicans about heart and humanity.
Mhm.
And when I started it, I just realized like we weren't talking to each other. And I had realized that like, if you were on the Democratic side, the Republicans were bad and different and Republican and vice versa. And I started talking to people about heart and humanity, not politics and policy. And you could really see this incredible piece of like people going, wow, that's a really nice person. I may disagree on a lot of their politics, but
Right.
there's a good person there. So I started this called the Capital Coffee Connection podcast, and it's out now. And one week I have a Republican governor, I have a Democratic senator, I have a Republican senator, and it goes back and forth because my goal is for all of us to see that there's real people out there. And when I started this podcast, I never envisioned that I'd be sitting here with you today talking about a hostage crisis, a humanitarian one. But what I learned was that that process of talking to people different and working together is powerful.
Yes, it's true. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to realize and keep reminding ourselves that everybody is human. We might not agree with everything everyone does in their work. That's their policies, these are their politics. But at the end of the day, we're all humans. We have children, we have parents, we have grandparents, we take care of people. So
listen, at the end of the day, there's so much more that unites us than divides us. There's so much more we have in common that we don't have in common. And humans, like you said, we are so closely biologically and DNA and in so many ways related. There's like a point, like less than a half a point difference of like what you and I are made of, or somebody in Africa or Asia or any place in the world. And yet we have made that little tiny percent so divisive.
Yeah.
And so even if like through this conversation, people will end this and think about like, hey, what can I do just to connect a little bit kinder and a little bit better with my neighbor? Somebody who maybe I really don't have a lot in common with. Think about walking into a market and just smiling at somebody who isn't somebody you know and saying, hi, how are you? Have a nice day. Those things go a long way.
Yeah, it's true. I heard years ago, somebody told me that if you give one person a compliment, just a random person that you don't know, just give them a compliment, it makes their day. And it's true. I feel like it's especially when it comes from a stranger.
Sometimes it's even a smile. Like you think about it, like, somebody smiles and just like, so you feel good.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a deficit in that. And so while we're here to talk about saving Abigail and why I wrote this book, what I've learned from this is if there's any silver linings, and there's so much horror and so much tragedy all around, and there's no competition for how sad October 7th was and continues to be for so many families in Israel and around the world, and the destruction and the devastation people live with in Gaza. I mean, it's horrible. But if there's one thing I've learned in this, is that if we work together, we can figure out how to move forward and heal. But it does start with like embracing not people maybe that are the same religion or have even the same beliefs of things, but really reaching out and broadening who we're going to bring in and be kind and work together with.
Mhm. Yep. During the process of the book, was there any specific moment that you were supposed to put, to write something in there throughout those 51 days? Was there anything that was very difficult and like was more challenging for you to write about than others?
Well, I think I tried to make the book not too long. So the challenge was obviously to edit out extra things, because what I wanted this to be as a piece, like I want people to read it and not go, oh my God, it's so long, but to keep turning the page because they want to find out more, but to make it a complete story in like 200 pages. So that was a challenge. I'm just saying from a writing perspective, but I think it's also a really good sized book, and it's important not to go on and on. You lose people. But I think that for me, the challenge was to also explain why I love Israel, why I am so proud of the Jewish people in Israel and around the world for coming together and being so strong for the most part in fighting for the hostages and getting them home and being united. And for me, that was an important, how do you express that? Because I'm going to be honest, we hear a lot of negativity about certain things about Israel in the world. We hear in the government here in Israel. But what I wanted to do was to make it not that Israel is about a government that people can say they dislike and then generalize it, but to understand the beauty of so many people that came and supported not only the hostages, but the families that lost people at the Nova Music Festival. And as we sit here today, I think it's over 1,000 soldiers who've lost their lives.
Yes, right now.
And talk about it from a perspective of the love and support of the Jewish people. I will talk about the evangelical Christians. I'll talk about many Muslim people in Israel and abroad that have been there and fighting for what it is, which is humanity. Yes, supporting their Jewish friends and their Jewish brothers and sisters, but fighting for humanity. And I think I was able to kind of get that through this with all the politicking and different stories I tell. There's beauty of how can we work together, and how can we also look at this and make sure it does not happen again. And how do we go forward? So I think when you ask about it, like that was my goal of this book, which is really to tell the true story of October 7th and the resilience of Abigail, myself, you, so many people, and then the hope. And that hope is not just like, I hope, but like a courageous hope, which is the world that we leave for Abigail and the kids her age and what they're going to have. So I think that I did that pretty well in the book. And yet the book is interesting, hard to read. It's a tearjerker, but there is a moment where you read it thinking, okay, if Abigail can get through this, Liz can get through this, we can also get through this. And then what are we going to do on the other side? And that's where we are today.
Yeah, and I think if there's one thing that us Jews and Israelis in particular have is hope. We've gone through so many of these devastating events that hope is like our only thing to hang on to. We need to have hope. Even the hostages that were in captivity for 2 years, they came back and they said, I was hoping to be out. I wanted to go out to my family. That is all that kept me going for all those years.
Yeah, and that's a deep hope. That's a courageous, powerful hope. And I think that, look, that I'm going to say this to this audience, to everyone listening, with all the anti-Semitism that we have faced, with all the hate speech, with people who showed glee on GoPro cameras, murdering and kidnapping and raping innocent people, Jewish and not, we did not stop. We have not stopped fighting. We have not stopped trying to tell the truth. And this is part of what I do and part of what you're doing here, and I know you do on your podcast, and telling the truth and making sure that there are, and it's another piece I've learned, there's a lot of hate on both sides, left, right, but there's a lot of really good people that we need to be having conversations with. And that's why these podcasts are important. My podcast, your podcast, so many, because they give people an opportunity to share their stories. And what I will tell you is that if we can tell our stories and we can bring people in, we will have that power of hope that will spread. And it isn't, you can't just sit there and say, I did my little piece and I hope. Those hostages, and I know for Hagar, who was with these kids, 4 kids, 51 days, her own 3 kids. Abigail, she knew Abigail's parents had been murdered because Abigail told them. She believed her husband had been murdered. She believed she wasn't going home. But she gave 4 little children hope.
Yeah.
And that's pretty courageous hope. They were starved. They had no hygiene. They were silenced. They were in the dark. There was nothing they could do. There was nothing to clean themselves with. But she gave them hope. And so it's those moments. And yes, people for 735 days that were held hostage, these young men. That's a magical, but it's a lot of courage.
Yeah.
It's not a hope that just slips off your tongue. It's a real deep hope.
It is. And you see, like, you hear their stories, particularly those that have been there for that long, for those 2 years. It's just incredible. You don't know that, like, as a human being, you don't know that if something like this happens to you, how you're going to deal with it. And they didn't know when, if they will ever be out. But to have all that hope and resilience and strength, mental strength that you need to keep going in those conditions that they were held in, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also I heard stories from the mothers that were there with their children, how they couldn't break down in front of the children. They needed to keep strong so their children are going to be okay. Yeah. And it's just, it's crazy. So after Abigail's release, you remained a dedicated advocate for the other hostages. How did you find the strength, speaking of that, to continue this difficult and emotional taxing work? Because it is a lot, going through all these things and meeting all these people and speaking about it over and over again.
Yeah. Look, any life that was still there, any body that was still there is something that I believe as Jewish people, I believe as humans, you don't leave people behind. As Jewish people, we're taught through Torah and through our studies, we don't leave people behind. And so for me, that was something that was very much strongly in my plan, which was, I'm not going to stop until everybody's home. And I will tell you, on October 13th, when those 20 men returned, that was a moment for all of us that we could go, okay, thank God. But you still had deceased people that needed to come home, and we still do. So you keep doing it. But I think that on October 7th, I woke up and I was part of a new family. I was part of a family of hostage families. And for me, being the person that was out there fighting for Abigail in the world and in America, day in and day out, I just got to know so many of these people, especially the American families, but families from all over, and that were coming from Israel, but that were, French or German or South African or South American, and, multiple citizenships. But they were coming to America, and you were just spending so much time in cafeterias and in cars and walking to meetings and sitting in meetings. You don't leave these people. They're fighting for their loved ones. And so I think that when you said, it was hard, it was exhausting. And yet at the same time, I got Abigail back. I was hoping they needed to get their Abigails back, whether they were older or younger or even deceased, because I know that the moment Abigail came back was the moment our family could start to move forward and that we could begin healing. And I know that for these families, that's the moment they begin healing, not only their loved ones and the ones who are alive, thank God, but everybody to begin. And so when you ask that question, I think the answer is, yes, it was hard. Everything is hard. But if you are in it for the reason which I was, which was to help save lives, you don't stop, because there's still lives to be saved. So I think, I don't think I'm alone in doing that. I think others would have done the same thing.
Yeah, we see a lot of people, and throughout those 2 years, we've seen the amount of people that turned up to the hostage square, to the rallies, just to support the families, and it's important. And unfortunately, we still have 2 last hostages, deceased hostages, still in Gaza. I hope that by the time this episode is released, that both of them will be returned to their families.
And look, I think that still, I believe Steve Witkoff and I know Jared Kushner, but I know President Trump and Marco Rubio, and that the American government is focused on getting everyone home. They didn't say everyone, but They are focused on getting everyone home. And I know the Qataris are still in this, and I know the Egyptians are working on it. So I know that there is pressure being put to make sure that Hamas releases those last 2 hostages. And I do hope that when this airs, they are home. But nobody's, you hear the hostages when they've been out, when they come back,
Yeah.
and they're talking about making sure the rest of their people come home.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And I hope that we see the last to return. So the remaining living hosts, like the ones that are out that have been fighting for their friends to come back, that they can finally heal properly and put this behind them and, you know, move on with their lives and make big and wonderful things with their lives. They have so many plans. So where can people purchase Saving Abigail, and where can they follow you to see what you're doing next?
Well, first, thank you. I just want to say thank you for the conversation, because for me, each time I get to speak, you know, I learn a lot, but I also think about it. And really what I want people to know is that we just have to keep in this together.
Yeah.
I don't love social media, but I have social media because you have to have social media. So you can follow me at Liz Hirsh Naftali / on Instagram. We have a YouTube channel, but I also do this Capital Coffee Connection podcast. And I can be found at the Capital Coffee Connection podcast on Instagram and on YouTube. And look, for people that are just wanting to have some good news and wake up and not just hear partisan fighting and who did what and what the latest doom scroll is, but they want to really like kind of think, okay, there's a potential for our country, America, and for people in the political world and leadership world to actually get along and show their heart and humanity. It's like 25, 30 minutes, and it's once a week, and I think it's joyful. And I have learned so much from people that I never thought I had anything in common with. So I just put that out there. It's called the Capital Coffee Connection podcast, and it's on all podcast platforms. So after they've listened to your podcast, they can go listen to this one. But the book, Saving Abigail, it's Hanukkah coming up. It's Christmas. If you have people in your community, and I say this to the Jewish people who are like wondering where the others are, you know what? Get this book, Saving Abigail, on Amazon. You can get the hardcover, you can get the soft, it's on Kindle, and I do an audio. But you know what? If in your office you have people that you need to give holiday gifts to, or people in your community who are not Jewish, don't know about October 7th, or this is a book that tells them. And you know what? It's better than a bottle of champagne in terms of what you're giving them.
Yeah.
It's better than a cheese platter, because what you're actually giving them is a truth. And we all have a responsibility to get the truth out there. So I think like right now for me, this is a moment for me to say like holidays, end of the year, it's a story about miracle. Abigail is truly a miracle. And so you can get it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Walmart, but Amazon gets it really quickly to you. So anyway, thank you. And just thank you for interviewing me and for having me here. And I just want to thank everyone who's listening for just being in this. Just listening here means we're all in this together. And so I say to you all, happy holidays, but I also say to you, keep the fight going and let us all keep working together. And I go back to what you said, compliment somebody. Somebody you don't even know. Say hello to somebody you don't even know. But let's all start to put those little ripples in, because those become big waves. And that's what we need to do. And that's what I believe we as Jewish people need to do. I think that is what we as Americans need to do. But I think that is just the basic thing that humans are looking for, which is connectivity.
Yep. Liz, thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
I hope Abigail and the family are doing well, and hopefully they keep on, doing better and better and better every day. And I can't wait to see what she does in her future. I feel like all those little children that came back, I can't wait to see what they do in the future.
I agree. They're going to show us, but in the meantime, we got to do the work to get it ready for them.
Yes. All right. Please, thank you again. And thank you all for listening. Until next time.